Hey, Miguel Iterati back here on the Cage Rage podcast, and we're going to go back to our bread and butter here and do some boxing history, and I'm going to fly solo today, but we're going to take over here, Cage Rage podcast number 80, and we got 80 of these in the books already, and for the history, it's April 16th or something like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to last week and then hit rewind 108 years ago and go back to the April 8th, 1911 edition of the Illustrated Record. Now, I've done this before, so if you're into it, buckle up. And if not, get to know the Illustrated Record. First of all, these are fun for me. A little shout out to my friend Sam Kid Hirsch, who sent me about a year's worth of these, on some real high quality paper and stuff like that. And it's, the kind of thing that lets you follow old time boxing real close. So this Illustrated Record is a big boxing issue. There's a lot of fights that it reports on and stuff. And the magazine, people subscribe to it. So this is how they got their boxing news in 1911. So, there might be stuff in the newspapers and, but you had no TV, you had no radio. So you had word of mouth. You had, you could travel by trains to see the fights if you had money and stuff like that. There was a middle class and people starting to do that. But most people waited for their subscription of a magazine like the Illustrated Record, and there were others. The Police Gazette, obviously, is the most famous one. And that's where they got their boxing news. This one's got Ad Walgas finishing Anton LeGrave on the cover. Walgas, at this point, the lightweight champion. This was a non-title 5-rounder, I believe, or something like that. Basically, Walgas got the job done on Anton LeGrave. LeGrave, one of the lesser, he was a ranked guy, I guess, in the lightweight division, but that was a loaded lightweight division at that time, and he wasn't a huge player. But that was his opponent. That's on the cover, and it says, Ad Walgas finishes Anton LeGrave. San Francisco champion, lightweight hammers, Butchertown lad, about the ring for 5 rounds. LeGrave's seconds throw in the sponge to save him from being knocked out. More details on the cover. At the top, it talks about Great White Hope, or it actually says White Hope. Carl Morris knocks out Mike Schreck. Again, it goes into Ad Walgas finishing Anton LeGrave. Sam Langford and Sam McVeigh, and that is a war of all-time greats. Battle to a draw, and featherweight kingpin Abe Atell outfights tough Frankie Burns. So that's the cover. I'm going to go just through the magazine and talk. I may read some of these out on here and stuff. The rest of the magazine obviously dedicated to like real-life crime and stories like that. And that makes some interesting reading in its own right. We may even have to do a couple of podcasts on that sort of stuff, Some of it is like, fictional writing and stuff like that and storytelling, but it's all what I would term, this is that episode, the Sun or, the paparazzi rags. I don't even know what the magazines are called nowadays. But, this is not frontline news, I don't think. Most of this stuff. Let's see what else we got here. Getting into the boxing. They pick up on boxing. On the first page here, we start to get just details on crime and things like that. The second page has got a couple of stories, and then on page, what I'm labeling here, page 5, we've got our first boxing stories. This tells you really, how long ago is 111 years? It really, it's more than a lifetime, really, unless, you're one of the extremes, that we have. But it's less than a lifetime, really. So, there are very few people alive from, that era. It's soon there'll be none. And then it's all memory. It's all, what was left. Luckily, the media from that time has things like this that, gives us a little bit of an inkling. The sports and things have really changed, and I think you get a feel for it here. The first headline on boxing, Conley to fight Kulon for 45 rounds for the title. Little boxers signed articles for bantamweight crown within 6 weeks, and they're to weigh 116 pounds. And obviously Johnny Coolin and Frankie Conley, two rivals there from that era that are all-time greats. Johnny Coolin was a media sensation afterwards. He used to have this trick where he could make himself heavy and people wouldn't be able to pick him up even though he was a little guy. And there's video of him doing that with like I don't know, the Jack Dempsey's and the next generation guy. And again, when you're talking about Frankie Conley and Johnny Coolin, the fight being announced and the contract getting signed, 45 rounds. So we are talking about a different era and a different ball game, huh? More headlines there. Young Sammy Smith whips Dick Highland. Highland, another known Philadelphia fighter from that era. Moving on here. Here we get to the article I'm interested in. I want to read this. The back cover is dedicated to it, and I sent some pictures in, so hopefully the editing is getting there. And the back cover's got several pictures drawn, handwritten, and it's got probably what would amount to about eight shots of the Sam McVeigh versus Sam Langford fight. And again, this is a battle of two all-time greats, and this went down in Paris, France. And we'll get a little more into the fighters in France there, but that French fight they're reporting on. And here's the headline on the back cover. It says, Langford beats McVeigh but gets draw. So the fight was a draw, and the observers think that Langford got the best of it. The captions for each picture, they spar for an opening. McVeigh puts a left hook to the jaw. The Tar Baby puts one on McVeigh's eye. They loosely use the Tar Baby a lot, and that's one of the things that strikes us 111 years later, strikes me 111 years later, is, the racism is that prevalent. I mean, it's in the type of art could almost be labeled racist too, and you'll see in the pictures and stuff. I don't think it'd be drawn like that right now. Langford had McVeigh on the run. McVeigh closes Langford's eye. Langford right lands on McVeigh's jaw. McVeigh clinches to save himself, and Langford keeps after McVeigh. Paris, France, the byline reads, Boston Tar Baby plainly has better of opponent, but referee didn't seem to think so. Spectators hooted the decision. So, there you got the little basics of a story. Now, Langford, at this point, is a little bit of a media star already, and he's known as one of the top guys and stuff, and the whites are avoiding him, and the whole thing. Now, Jack Johnson's avoiding him. So that fight also gets several paragraphs from the French reporting, and it says, Tar Baby lands throughout battle, spectators hoot verdict again. Before a crowd of 7,000 persons at the Cirque de Paris, the other night, Sam Langford and Sam McVeigh fought 20 rounds to a draw for a guaranteed purse of $10K. When referee Corey announced the verdict, there were loud hoots and hisses from the vast audience, the majority of spectators voicing their disapproval of the referee's ruling in that matter. Langford, although at a disadvantage in weight, height, and reach, showed clearly that he was the master of McVeigh from the outset, and had it not been for the holding tactics of McVeigh, the bout would not have gone the limit. I'm going to skip a few paragraphs down here, and they go into a round by round, which I always find interesting. Langford opened the first round by trying to floor McVeigh, and after trying several right crosses, rested towards the end of the round. In the second, McVeigh got home some stiff left hooks. Langford retaliated with left hook to the wind. In the third, McVeigh went to his knees from a fall, and on regaining his feet, Langford ripped in a terrific uppercut to the jaw, McVeigh holding him off with his long left to avoid another. In the fourth, McVeigh drove his right to the wind and hooked a hard left to the jaw. Langford walked in close and had McVeigh tottering from right uppercut and a left hook on the chin. McVeigh fought back, and stepping aside, Langford chopped over another right that staggered McVeigh. McVeigh was groggy going to his corner. In the fifth and sixth rounds, McVeigh forced the milling and got home some good left-hand work on Langford's head and body. He fought fast and blocked all the attempts Langford made. And I'm going to skip forward to the last round here. In the last round, McVeigh opened with a left hook on the jaw, and in another attempt missed and fell to his knees. Langford was at him in an instant and hooked a hard left to the wind. McVeigh came back with a right that landed high on Langford's head. Langford was tired out at the end of the bout, but there was little doubt in the minds of the crowd that he was clearly entitled to the verdict. And when the referee called about a draw, there were loud hoots and a noisy demonstration, many of the gathering threatening to mob the referee. So, sounds like your average boxing audience in the United States, too, you know what I mean? But they were in Paris, and later on here, I'm going to find in here, as we move on, so that's the report on Sam McVeigh and Sam Langford. And I find that, you know, like I said, that's a battle of all-time greats, so to get into that is very interesting. That was on page 7. Just to give people an idea here, on page 7 also, there's a subscription. It says, don't miss this offer. The Illustrated Record is sold in thousands of towns in the United States by our agents, but we want more of them. If there's no way to buy selling the record in your hometown, send us the... If there's no boy selling the record in your town, send us the name of one that will and sell the same. Get us a boy. As long as the boy you appoint sells the record, we will have him deliver you a copy every week for free. Don't miss this chance. Have the boy fill in the blank below. So you always have that image of, you know, kids getting like street corners and you know, selling newspapers and stuff like that. And here's actually another level of it where this newspaper, or, you know, and it was a newspaper. This was a big newspaper. It's in magazine size because of the photocopies that I have. But it was a newspaper type of document. And, you know, the kids would sell it. You know, they'd get 10 delivered, and if they sold it and returned the money and stuff like that, you know, the guy who referred them would get a free subscription. And, you know, everybody's, you know, distributing newspapers there like the old-fashioned way, you know what I mean? And as we move on here, in page 8 and 9 are dedicated to a gatefold, like, with more pictures of the fights that were going on that week, I guess. Leech Cross, who comes up later, knocks out Bedell. Doherty beaten by Burke. Frank Klaus stops Jack Sullivan. A good picture of Carl Morris puts Mike Schreck away. When I say picture, these are all drawings again. Dick Delson beats Decker. Schwartz bests Highland. Lavin too much for Quill. Gary defeats Howell. Abe Attell outclasses Frankie Burns. Ahern shades Langdon, and Tommy Murphy outpoints Battling Kelly. So those are the pictures of the fights and stuff. And then over here we get into the revolutions in Mexico. So there's a headline about the governments of Mexico, and at this point, I'm sure that those are all real interesting reading. On that same page is a long piece about Abe Attell. It's called about Abe Attell. Very interesting. Abe Attell, the featherweight champion of the world. One of the most interesting characters of the old days in boxing in my book. I mean, the bottom line is if you're not a boxing fan or you just happen to be listening and you're not familiar with Abe Attell and any of the history from this era, you may have heard that the 1919 World Series, the baseball World Series, the Black Sox scandal, and that World Series was thrown, that mobsters paid 9 of the White Sox or of the players there $10,000 each to throw games or whatever the deal was. This is 1919. Abe Attell is retired, but Abe Attell is the man who delivered the cash to the fighters. So he worked for the man and was the guy heavily involved, you know, and actually was moving $90K in cash, which, you know, that's a good bit of cash now. You can't get on a plane with $90K right now unless you declare it and do that sort of stuff, you know. And that's right now, 111 years later. So $90K in cash, you know, at this point it would have been actually 100 years exactly, right? But $100K in cash, you know, is a considerable amount of money, and Abe was in. He was in with people. Interestingly, the big mobster, I'll forget his name right now, but the big mobster went to jail for the Black Sox scandal. Abe didn't. Abe found a couple years in Canada, got to know our northern neighbors, and then trucked himself back down. I think when I read this about Abe Attell piece from the Illustrated Record of April 8th, 1911, you'll get a little feel for Abe Attell. Let's see what they got for us. Featherweight champion has earned $200,000 during 13 years of fighting. 13 years ago, Abe Atell was one of a family of 12 children, 7 boys and 5 girls. His father was dead. The wolf was sometimes at the door, but Abe's mother, by endless sacrifice and peerless courage, kept the little flock together. One day, Abe got a chance to enter the ring. He won easily. The night Abe carried $15 into his humble home, there was rejoicing in the Atell household. Abe Atell, featherweight champion of the world, is the wonder of wonders of the prize ring. He has seen champions of all classes come and go during his career, yet today he stands supreme, practically invincible at the head of the featherweight division, and few are they among the lightweights who can defeat him. Within a period of 13 years during which he has been fighting, Atell has cleaned up more than $200,000. No matter what happens now, he is beyond want for the rest of his life, and the members of his family living in San Francisco are all in comfortable circumstances thanks to the earnings of Abe. Attell's story is one of success from the start. Some 15 years ago, Atell was a scrappy, almost incorrigible kid around the streets of Frisco. No school could keep him more than a couple of weeks at a time. His mother, left a widow with a family of 12 when Abe was only 5, could do nothing with her third youngest. He was a constant source of trouble to her, and so it was that during his school days, giving up all hope of ever making anything of the boy, she shipped him off to his uncle in Los Angeles. It was like doing time for Abe, away from home in his schoolboy fights, and he soon realized that good behavior would mean a quick return to Frisco. Meanwhile, his uncle had become impressed by Abe's change of temperament and decided that a musical education would be the proper thing for Abe. Much against his will, Abe was sent to a music teacher and was soon blowing his head off into the mouthpiece of a cornet. Abe Atell played the cornet. I find that fascinating for some reason. When his enforced stay in Los Angeles ended in 15 months, Abe was quite a musician, and even today plays the instrument well. He has one at home now at which he blows all the popular tunes. Abe hadn't lived down his reputation as a scrapper when he got back to Frisco. He found that several of the youngsters he tried to beat up in the impromptu fights on the street had gone into the amateur boxing game and were making a big success of it. One in particular, Kid Lynette, whom Abe used to lick every recess hour, had won 10 straight fights. The other boys soon goaded Abe into fighting too, and Alex Gregains, who was then promoting 4-round bouts, induced Abe to match himself against Lynette. Abe ran home to ask his mother, but she put her foot down decisively and said no. Abe went back and told Gregains that his mother wouldn't let him fight, but by that time the printing was out and the card in the bold letters announced Abe Atell vs. Kid Lynette, 4 rounds. Again, Abe rushed home to his mother and showed her the printed card. "The boys are all calling me a quitter. Please let me fight, Mother." Abe begged. Mother finally consented reluctantly, and away went Abe to fight. He won in 2 rounds and got $15, which he carried home as fast as he could. In those days, it was a lot of money in the Abe Atell household. There were 13 mouths to feed, and every dollar counted. A second fight soon afterward netted 15 more, and then Abe, satisfying his boyhood's ambition, got a job as a messenger boy. He was soon nicknamed the Fighting Messenger Boy, and in several little scraps was a lot more than he earned as messenger boy. His mother always got the money. One day, Eddie Toy, who is now fighting around New York, suggested that Abe take a trip east with him. The idea was big to Abe, and when he borrowed car fare from his mother, he and Toy found themselves in Denver 2 days later. Abe soon got a fight there with Kid Buck, the newsboy's pride, and won in jig time. This fight bought him his first big money, $60. He won several other fights after that and was sending money home regularly. Finally, he was matched with George Dixon, then the champion of his class. When the news reached Frisco, it created despair in the Atell home. Telegrams and letters were sent to Abe in Denver begging him not to fight Dixon. His brothers thought him crazy and assured him that it was almost suicide to think of fighting Dixon. "I paid no attention to the pleading from home, but went on with the match," said Abe. "It was a 10-round draw. Then I was somebody," said Abe, reflecting today. "Young Corbett was the big noise in Denver at the time, and soon I became his sparring partner. He had beaten a lot of good men, and I was tickled to death to be in his training camp. Meanwhile, Corbett was dickering for a match in the East with Terry McGovern. 'If I beat McGovern,' said Corbett to me, 'I'll come back and give you a match.' If I beat McGovern," said Corbett to me, I guess as Abe, I'll come back and give you a match. Corbett beat McGovern all right, but he never gave Atell the chance. As Abe said, he looked as if he had missed something great, the chance of a lifetime. Despite the throwdown by McGovern's conquer, Atell kept plugging along with a winning fight after fight. He had almost 150 up to date, and only decisive knockout registered against him is that scored by Tommy Sullivan of Brooklyn in 1904. Most of Abe's winnings up to that time. He was married 5 years ago to Elizabeth Margaret Egan, a San Francisco girl who went home to his mother. Today his mother owns 3 houses in Frisco, but his brothers are in the loan business and doing well. In addition, Abe himself owns a house and a lot in Los Angeles, which he paid $10,000 for 5 years ago, after he beat Frankie Neal. The property is worth $18,000 now. The house rents for $70 a month. His wife has 2 pieces of valuable property in Frisco. Abe has $45,000 and $200,000 he has earned with his fist stowed away. There hasn't been a single death in the family since the father died. All are alive and happy. Abe's mother is 65 years old today, but has all the life and activity of a woman of 35, according to the Little Champion. Abe gives a lot of credit to his success during the last 5 years to his little Irish wife. She has kept me on the straight and narrow path, and I have no time for dissipation. I have known her 12 years. She went to school with my sisters at home. When Atell talks about dissipation, he doesn't include drinking or smoking. He never did either, and about his only bad habit was gambling. He used to love to play the races, and up to a year and a half ago, he was won and lost fortunes on the racetracks. He says he hasn't made a bet on the pony since 1908 at Saratoga. Now he plays cards, just social games, now and then, but no big stakes ever figured into play. Talking of his fights, Atell says his hardest was those battling Nelson in Frisco in 1908. It was 15-round draw. Nelson was in his prime then, and although he outweighed Atell, the little featherweight stood toe-to-toe with him and exchanged wallets from start to finish. Atell dislikes criticism, and he says that for years, too much has been expected of him as the champion. He doesn't like to be regarded as a picker of lemons. If I fight a so-called lemon and fail to knock him out, he says, I'm accused of pulling. The other fellow gets no credit for being a good man. If I knock out a man in 2 rounds, the papers say Atell picks another lemon. It's awful hard on a champion. Atell explains the rarity of knockouts these days by saying the present-day fighter employs a style vastly different from the old-timers. They cover up nowadays, and a man risks his hands trying to open them up. If you slam away at the other fellow's arms and elbows, you break your hands. Then what good are you? Nowadays, you can't keep punching. You have to wait for the spot and then let it go. I know I have been accused of stalling, but I keep winning just the same. Atell realizes he can't go forever, and it was for that reason he has decided to retire to go into some business at the end of the year. Just now he's dickering for the sale of a piece of property in the vicinity of the New American League ballpark. Atell is laid up for repairs now. He suffered a broken left forearm and a right shoulder blade injury in his recent fight with Tommy Kilbane in Cleveland. He is all bandaged up and his shoulder blade is in plaster of Paris. These injuries will keep him out of the ring for at least, I can't really read what that says, it will cost him something like $10,000. And that is how the article ends. So there you get to be a little bit of a Atell. What's interesting to me is that's, what they said about him there. And that is a good little bit of, what I would term, PR work from the Abe Atell people, I think, that trying to construe him as married to an Irish wife that keeps him on the straight and narrow, and how he only plays social games now. And I mean, consider a few years later he was working for a big time mobster who was working out throwing the World Series, and he was knee deep in that. So fascinating what was going out to the public, and already a little bit of shenanigans and people minding their Q scores, trying to stay famous but not letting everybody in under the hood, So let's get to the last page here with the boxing news. Here there's some really interesting stuff here. Let's get into this stuff here. And again, Leech Cross again knocks out Joe Bedell. So Leech Cross is one of those guys that we need to know more about, because he's a guy that comes up as fighting a lot of the tough guys from this era, and here he's getting a little bit of a headline, so That's good to see that, that's a trail to follow if you're a fan there. We got the Carl Morris wins easily headline. The Oklahoma White Hope knocks out Mike Schreck in the 6th round. This happened in Oklahoma. Carl Morris of Oklahoma, called the heavyweight pugilistic hope of the white race, made good his name in the prize ring 2 miles south of here the other afternoon by knocking out Mike Schreck of Pittsburgh in the 6th round of what was to have been a 15-round bout. A right to the jaw did the work. It was Morris's fight from the start to finish, which came 1 minute 2 seconds after the beginning of the 6th round when Schreck fell heavily and took the count. And as we go on to this page, now there's one article here that really, it jumped out at me that I wanted to read, and I want to make sure that we find it here. So we'll go back here and find it here. Here's the play-by-play of Atell outpointing Frank Burns, and that's a long piece too. Again, that goes into a round by round and goes through the 10 rounds. So there's a substantial amount on that fight. Examples. 3rd round, Burns backing away, put ineffective less. Atell, cool and deliberate, proceeded to outbox him, landing short blows when he felt like it and blocking the Jersey man's wild with great skill. Suddenly, Atell began to warm to his work, and with stiff jabs and jolts, he made Burns clinch. The latter seemed to be suffering from rattles and forgot all he ever knew about science. Atell forced the issue steadily, and with several sharp left-handed punches, he sent Burns into a corner. The round was all the featherweight champion's favor. Skipping just to read the 7th so you get a feel. Burns began to force it with a rush. He shot a left to the neck, and Atell punched him with left and right in his stomach. Burns tried another rush, but Atell wasn't there. They sparred a moment, after which Burns began to slug. This just suited Atell, who jarred his man with 2 heavy lefts in the mouth. Burns stopped for a minute for an exchange of wallops until Atell drove him into a corner with rapid blows on the head. Burns came back with vigor, however, and Atell began to stall. Attell's round on blows landed. So, Abe was treated already as a little bit of royalty and a little bit of one of those guys that, was already famous and that sort of stuff. And, there you have an example of the reporting and stuff. And I think, he's a pretty decorated all-time champion here. I did miss a piece on page 7 I want to read. This is many American fighters in Europe. Never before have there been so many American fighters in London and Paris at one time looking for battles as they are at the present. The big boom which pugilism has received in those countries since the beginning of the year is responsible for our scrappers making the journey. The Yankee fighters who are in either England or France right now are Sam Langford, Willie Lewis, Jimmy Clabby, Ray Bronson, Eddie McGourty, Perky Flynn, Battling Jim Johnson, Harry Lewis, Frank Moran, Sammy Smith, Blink McCloskey, Bob Armstrong, George Gunther, Jack Burns, Leo Houck, Frank Laurie, Tom Laurie, and Sam McVeigh. Again, traveling to Paris, that, to me, the Paris and London, that circuit there where these guys were fighting, especially when you consider, that Langford was one of the guys that at some point Jack Johnson was there, Sam McVeigh was there. There were other killers there that right now I just want to make sure I don't get the names wrong. But these guys were legitimate all-time greats, and the French and people there were leading them over there. And here's a little bit of the reporting that went on there. Now, getting to the last page, and how fitting to end this podcast then with Jack Johnson. And Jack Johnson at this point is the heavyweight champion of the world. He hasn't fought in a little bit. He's been making the news, and here, Johnson loses appeal, champion sent to jail. Negro heavyweight, there it is again. This is predominant, 1911. 1911, 40-something plus years after the slaves were freed. You'd think, the headlines wouldn't use the word Negro, but they certainly did, and more. Johnson loses appeal, champion sent to jail. Negro heavyweight takes count of 25 days in California court. San Francisco, Jack Johnson, champion heavyweight pugilist, occupies a cell in the county jail at Ingleside. He will remain there for 25 days unless the District Court of Appeals grants him freedom on a writ of habeas corpus. The big fighter took the count in Superior Judge Morgan's court before legal onslaught of District Attorney Ficker. At the conclusion of arguments, Judge Morgan remanded Johnson to the custody of the sheriff. He was at once removed to the county jail and given his old quarters in cell 32. Steps were taken at once by Johnson's attorneys to file a writ of habeas corpus in the higher court. If it fails, the fighter's last hope is gone. In the early rounds of the court contest, Johnson lawyers did all the leading. They took the stand that Johnson violated the law in Golden Gate Park outside the city and into the jurisdiction only of the park commissioners. Neil McGraw's most effective blow, however, was his reference to the Roof case. He argued that Roof was released from custody when it was shown that an indictment to which he pleaded guilty did not charge a public offense. Johnson claimed his case to be identical. I shall not attempt to refute the lengthy arguments of my opponent, said Ficker, in answering the arguments. He has done that himself. To his contention that the park is under the jurisdiction of the park commissioners and not the board of supervisors, no answer is necessary. We claim that the complaint and the judgment roll are complete and correct, and we await your Honor's judgment. Judge Moran then pronounced a champion sentence. Johnson has often been an offender against the speed law. After 14 arrests, from which he escaped with life fines or dismissal, he ran against acting police Judge Treadwell. On that day, he pleaded guilty to a charge of speeding, and he was sentenced to jail. He took an appeal to the Superior Court, and Judge Hogan dismissed the appeal, forfeited the fighter's $500 bail, and ordered him into immediate custody.
Listo.
10 minutes later, 2 deputy sheriffs had him in charge, bound for the Branch County Jail. So, interestingly enough, Johnson doing 25 days for driving offense, speeding in 1911. And there are great pictures of him with cars, a lot of pictures of him with cars. There's one, I was reading a Tex Rickard book, thumbing through a Tex Rickard book earlier this week, and there's a great picture of Tex Rickard in a race car with Johnson, around this era. And the bottom line is, in 1911, cars were, not what they are today. They're luxury, and the fast, the big fast cars and stuff to get, stopped for speeding and stuff like that. 14 times, So it's very, very interesting. Johnson was one of those guys who definitely pressed the envelopes in ways, and he paid for it, and he went to jail for driving offenses. So anyway, I'm Miguel Durrani for the CRP. I always love these old boxing history ones. I never get tired of doing them, and what we did here is we looked at the illustrated record for April 8th, 1911. And great stuff on boxing there. We didn't even get into any of the non-boxing stuff, which is just as fascinating. If you can get a boxing collection going and have access to some of this stuff, you really should look at it and just treasure it, because this is golden stuff from an era that we simply don't know enough about. It's not old enough to be like real history. So you don't want to forget stuff. And like I said, this was a magazine that was dedicated to boxing, but also to they had a comics page, and also to news and crime news and stuff like that. But in terms of the racism, it's not just boxing. The comics page, it shows it amply from time to time, and they're insensitive in our ways, about things like autism, or they use words we don't use anymore to describe folks like that. So it's something, it's a historic look back. It's important to do that, and to do it with a good, clear mind, because the bottom line is the fighters heading over to Paris were going there for opportunity, for money, to get paid, and they had to let maybe to me it just seems like one of the most racist things that could be. And the French don't have the stigma of the States of bringing slaves over by the boatload, But to me, there's nothing more racist than white French people in their best garb. You're talking about women with the gloves and men with the coattails and stuff like that, watching blacks box, But at the end of the day, these guys had to have, food for the table and stuff. We also got to meet Abe Atell. Definitely a tried and true character. We mentioned Ad Walgast. We've done podcasts on Ad Walgast, and Here we didn't even get into them, just to show you the depth of the stuff that we're looking at here. I'm Miguel Durán. This is CRP 80 Boxing History, and very happy to be here. Please subscribe, like us, love us, and we'll be back with more on the CRP.